The chandelier above the ballroom glowed like a crown of fire, scattering light over faces that pretended to adore my father. Gregory Wynn, real estate magnate, philanthropist, and tyrant in a tailored tuxedo, was turning 70, and Chicago's elite had gathered to worship him. The air reeked of champagne money and lies. I stood near the edge of the room, a silent shadow in a silver gown that Veronica, my stepmother, had called modest enough not to embarrass the family. She smiled when she said it, her voice dipped in poison. I had learned long ago that every compliment in the Wynn house came with a blade. My name is Clara Wynn. I am 32 years old, an art restorer who spends her days breathing life into paintings no one remembers. Tonight, I was a spectator in the empire my father built from intimidation. I was not the daughter who closed deals or charmed investors. That was Lucas, my older brother, golden boy, heir destroyer of anything that threatened his reflection. I was the quiet one, the one who fixed broken things and tried not to break further. When the band fell silent and the applause swelled, my father took the stage. Cameras rose. The sound of clinking glass echoed through the chandeliers like a warning. "Thank you for celebrating my 70 years," he began, his voice thick with confidence. "I built this legacy with my own 2 hands, and I'm proud to share it with those who deserve it." The pause that followed felt deliberate. His eyes found me across the crowd. The smile that curved his lips wasn't warmth, it was the slow tightening of a noose. "My family stands beside me tonight, my wife Veronica and my son Lucas." He extended his arm toward them. Polite applause rippled through the guests. I stayed frozen, watching his eyes gleam with something almost hungry. Then he said it. "And my daughter Clara." My name hung in the air like smoke. "Who's chosen a life of disappointment instead of legacy?" Laughter rolled through the room, soft, nervous, complicit. I felt my pulse in my throat. "Dad," I whispered, barely audible. He descended the steps from the stage, each polished shoe hitting the marble like a drumbeat. Cameras followed him. "You think hiding in your little art shop makes you better than us?" His voice carried. "You live off what I gave you. Every dime, every breath. And you repay me with shame." Gregory, Veronica murmured, touching his arm, pretending restraint. "Not here." "Exactly here," he snapped. "Let them see what failure looks like." Before I could move, before I could breathe, his hand came down across my face. The sound cracked through the ballroom, louder than the music, louder than the gasps that followed. My head jerked sideways, heat exploded in my cheek, my glass shattered against the floor. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. And then the phones rose. Dozens of guests, people I had known since childhood, lifted their cameras recording my humiliation like it was entertainment. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, he really hit her." My father raised his voice, towering over me. "You're no daughter of mine," he thundered. "From this moment on, you're cut from the Wynn estate. Every dollar, every share gone." The crowd erupted in murmurs. I tasted blood at the corner of my mouth. I wanted to vanish, to crawl out of my own skin, but my body refused to move. Lucas stood near the bar, drink in hand, watching with detached curiosity, the faintest smile touching his lips. "She brought it on herself," he said to a guest beside him. "Always has." My chest constricted. I looked toward Veronica, the woman who had replaced my mother, searching for something, pity, shame, decency. She only sighed, perfectly composed. "Gregory, calm down," she said sweetly, loud enough for the cameras. "You're upsetting everyone." He turned to her, shaking with anger, and she leaned close enough to whisper, "They're all recording." "Smile." He did. He smiled while my dignity bled out on the marble floor. "Enjoy the show, everyone," he declared, lifting his glass. "To family, what's left of it." Laughter erupted again, forced, brittle, cruel. I stumbled back, dizzy, humiliated. My reflection caught in one of the mirrored columns a pale face, tear-streaked mascara hair, disheveled eyes that didn't look like mine. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my clutch and forced my way through the sea of glittering strangers, ignoring their whispers. "She's unstable. Did you hear? He's cutting her off?" "Poor thing, will not pour anymore." Outside, the winter wind slapped harder than he had. Snow drifted against the steps, softening the city's noise into a cruel hush. I pressed my hand to my cheek, still burning, and felt the swelling bloom beneath my palm. For 32 years, I had endured his temper, his coldness, his endless lectures about gratitude. But this was different. This was the moment he made sure the world knew I was nothing. Flashbulbs still flickered through the glass doors behind me. My humiliation was public now, immortalized in pixels and headlines waiting to happen. I wanted to scream, but my throat only released a tremor of breath that fogged in the cold. Somewhere inside, the band resumed playing as if the empire must not lose its rhythm. I walked away without looking back. Each step felt like walking out of someone else's story. At the corner, I stopped beneath a streetlight. My phone buzzed. Notifications flooded the screen. Billionaire Gregory Wynn slaps daughter at gala. Videos, memes, comments, laughter, rage. The internet already devouring what was left of me. I stared at my reflection in the phone's dark glass, my lips split, eyes hollow. Then I whispered the only truth I had left. That slap wasn't just a punishment. It was 32 years of control distilled into one hit. I dropped the phone into my clutch, pulled my coat tighter, and stepped into the falling snow. The city lights blurred around me, gold bleeding into gray. Somewhere, music and laughter carried from the ballroom, his world still spinning, mine cracked wide open. I didn't know it yet, but that single blow had already begun to dismantle his empire brick by brick, secret by secret. I just hadn't learned the truth of who I really was. Not yet. The morning after the gala, the bruise had turned the color of wine. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my reflection in the stainless steel kettle, tracing the shape of his hand on my skin. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating all-night calls from reporters, gossip blogs, and relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I ignored them all until one message appeared on the screen. Apologize publicly, and maybe I'll reconsider the will. Dad. I read it twice, then laughed so hard it frightened me. He hit me in front of 300 people, destroyed my name, and still believed I owed him an apology. That was Gregory Wynn in a single sentence, a man who mistook fear for respect and control for love. I typed back, "You already taught me my worth?" "Nothing." Then I blocked his number. Silence filled the apartment thick as fog. I thought about packing a bag, disappearing, starting over somewhere no one knew the name Wynn, but I couldn't even decide where to go. My whole life was built around the illusion of family. Without it, who was I when I was 16? I'd asked him for permission to attend an art program in New York. He'd looked at me like I'd confessed a crime. "You think painting will pay the bills," he'd said. "You're a Wynn. You'll learn real business, not fairy tales." When I refused to give up, he cut my allowance and forced me to work in the company archives 12-hour days, filing his empire's paperwork. I used to cry in the bathroom until Lucas found me once and said, "Stop embarrassing yourself. Just do what he says." Then he'd smirked and shoved my shoulder hard enough that I hit the wall. That was the day I learned pain was how men in my family communicated. The next few years were a blur of obedience. I went to business school because he ordered it, attended events where I stood behind him like a prop, smiled on cue, said nothing when Veronica belittled me in front of guests. "Clara's just sensitive," she would say, voice sugar sweet. "She has the soul of an artist, too fragile for real life." Everyone laughed. I learned to laugh too. Every family photo on the mantel was a piece of propaganda, his arm around my shoulders, his smile wide enough to hide the bruises. After my mother died when I was 9, Gregory remarried in 6 months. Veronica was elegance incarnate, emerald dresses, diamond smiles, and eyes that measured worth like currency. She called me darling, but watched me like a rival. One night when I was 13, I overheard her telling him, "She looks nothing like you." His reply was quiet but sharp. "She's mine. She'll learn to act like it." That was the first time I wondered what he meant. For decades, he controlled me with money. Every apartment, every bill, every opportunity came with invisible strings. If I expressed independence, he'd cut funds, then swoop back in as savior. You see, he'd say, "You can't survive without me." Gaslighting wasn't a tactic for him, it was oxygen. After the slap went viral, he called reporters claiming I'd had a breakdown and that he was worried for my mental health. It worked. Within hours, headlines shifted. "Concerned father fears for unstable daughter." My humiliation became his redemption arc. I sat on the couch watching the morning news, the anchor saying, "Sources close to the family say Clara has a history of emotional instability." My hands shook so badly I dropped the remote. Veronica's voice echoed from the screen in a recorded statement outside the Wynn estate. "Gregory loves his children deeply. Sometimes tough love looks harsh from the outside, but family matters are private." She even dabbed fake tears with a tissue. It was performance art, and I was the villain in her play. I turned off the TV. The bruise pulsed like a heartbeat. The whole world was already rewriting the story, and I was losing ownership of my own pain. I thought of calling Lucas, but I could already imagine his voice cold amused. "What did you expect? You humiliated him. He'd always believed loyalty meant silence. When our father insulted employees, Lucas laughed first. When he berated me, Lucas filmed it for proof of your tantrums." That was his version of brotherly love. I poured myself a cup of coffee, but my hands were trembling so badly it sloshed over the rim. I whispered, "Enough." The word felt strange, heavy. I picked up my laptop and began drafting a statement not to defend myself, but to reclaim my narrative. My father has always believed love is earned through obedience. I no longer subscribed to that belief. I never posted it. I knew it would only feed the fire. Instead, I closed the laptop and let the quiet stretch. The snow outside had thickened the world, turning white as if trying to erase what happened. I went to the mirror and studied my reflection. Beneath the bruise, I saw something else. A flicker of rage that wasn't fear anymore. A lifetime of submission had calcified into something sharper. I thought of every time he told me I was ungrateful, every time Veronica told me to smile, every time Lucas smirked while I swallowed my pride. They'd mistaken endurance for weakness. They were wrong. When the doorbell rang that afternoon, I almost didn't answer. I thought it was another reporter, or maybe someone from his PR team with a non-disclosure agreement. But the voice on the intercom was calm, professional. "Miss Wynn, we need a moment of your time. We're here on behalf of the federal investigation." My stomach dropped. "Federal investigation?" I repeated. "Concerning what?" The voice hesitated. "Your identity, ma'am." Something inside me went still. "My identity," I whispered half to myself. "What about it?" The man's tone softened, almost kind. "It would be easier to explain in person." I stared at the intercom speaker, the snow swirling behind them through the glass. For a second, I thought this was another one of my father's intimidation games, another way to corner me. But the way he said it, steady, factual, official, made my heart stutter. I pressed the button. "Come in." I didn't know then that by opening that door, I was about to unravel 32 years of lies. The bruise on my cheek wasn't the wound that would change everything. It was just the beginning. 3 people stood in the hallway when I opened the door, their breath turning to mist in the cold. The woman in front was tall, around 60, her gray hair pulled into a severe knot. Her coat, a dark navy wool that looked expensive but practical. Behind her stood 2 men, one younger, maybe late 30s, holding a leather briefcase, and another in an FBI windbreaker who scanned the hallway like he expected an ambush. For a second, I thought my father had sent them to intimidate me, his favorite trick when apologies didn't come fast enough. The woman extended a card between gloved fingers. "Margaret Hale," she said calmly. "Senior partner Hale and Cho Law Group. This is my associate David Cho and Agent Rivera with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." I stared at the card without taking it. "FBI." The agent nodded politely. "Miss Wynn, may we come in?" "This isn't a conversation for the hallway." My mind raced through every possibility. Maybe Gregory was pressing charges for defamation, or Veronica was suing me for emotional distress. It wouldn't be the first time they used the law as a weapon. "Fine," I said, stepping aside. My apartment felt smaller with them inside. Margaret placed her gloves on the counter and sat at the table folding her hands. "Thank you for meeting us, Miss Wynn. I understand the timing is difficult." I crossed my arms. "That's an understatement." David opened his briefcase, sliding a folder across the table. The FBI agent remained standing, his posture professional but guarded. "Before we continue, Margaret said I want to assure you that you're not in any trouble. We're here because of a matter that concerns your personal background." I frowned. "My background?" "Specifically," she continued, "your birth records." The room tilted slightly as if the air had thinned. What about them? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. There have been recent developments in a reopened case involving a missing child from Oregon. The details of that case overlap with your file. I laughed sharp and humorless. You think I'm some missing person? My father's name is on every document I've ever had. He's very thorough. Margaret didn't smile. Yes, that's precisely why we're here. She opened the folder, revealing a stack of aged police reports and photographs. The top page bore a faded headline, "Child vanishes from Portland Park. 3-year-old Layla Monroe missing." My stomach turned. The date read, June 1996, 30 years ago. Margaret's voice softened. A routine database scan flagged your DNA as a 99.9% match to the Monroe family profile. DNA, I whispered. Then I remembered. Last year a friend had convinced me to try one of those genealogy kits. I'd sent it off, forgotten about it. That's impossible, I said. My parents, Gregory and Veronica, adopted me legally. David spoke for the first time, voice low and precise. There's no legal record of any adoption, Miss Wynn. Your birth certificate was falsified using documents purchased through a defunct Mexican intermediary in the late 90s. The words didn't make sense, like they were in another language. No, I said. My mother, she died when I was 9. My father, he's alive. You're telling me my entire life is what a crime scene agent Rivera stepped forward, placing a small envelope on the table. Inside was a photograph, an old Polaroid of a couple holding a little girl in a yellow dress. The woman had auburn hair and kind eyes. The man, tall with dark features, smiled at her like the world began and ended in that moment. The little girl looked toward the camera, clutching a silver bracelet shaped like a crescent moon. That's not me, I said automatically, but my voice cracked halfway through. We obtained this photo from the Monroe family, Margaret said. The bracelet belonged to their daughter Layla. They described it as custom-made. My hand moved on its own, brushing the thin chain around my wrist, the same silver crescent I'd worn my whole life. Gregory used to tell me it was a family heirloom, a symbol of the Wynn name. I stared at it now as if it might burn me. Where did they get that photo, I asked. It was taken a week before the abduction, Margaret said. Layla disappeared from Laurelhurst Park while under the care of a nanny. The suspect was a woman who claimed to be lost, asking for directions. This is insane, I muttered, pushing away from the table. You're saying Veronica kidnapped me? She was barely 30 back then. 31, Margaret corrected softly. She fit the composite the police had at the time. The investigation went cold after her sudden marriage to Gregory Wynn 6 months later. I felt my breath catch. You can't prove that. David opened another folder, revealing a notarized confession. A former nanny named Maria Santos left this statement before her death last year. She admitted she was paid $50,000 to look away for 5 minutes. She believed it was a private adoption until she saw the news. My knees gave out and I sank into a chair. I wanted to deny everything to scream, but the evidence lay there in neat official pages, police reports, DNA results, testimonies. My world dismantled with paperwork. Margaret's tone was gentle but firm. Your biological parents, Michael and Elaine Monroe, never stopped looking for you. They founded a missing children's foundation. The FBI reopened the case after your DNA match last month. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. You're telling me Gregory Wynn isn't my father, I said slowly. No, she replied. He's the man who stole you. The words detonated inside me. The image of his hand striking my face at the gala flashed through my mind, and I felt something twist, a mix of horror and clarity. For the first time in my life, the slap made sense. It wasn't just punishment. It was possession. I whispered, he always said I belonged to him. I thought it was metaphorical. Margaret reached into her bag and produced a sealed envelope. Your biological father, Michael Monroe, asked us to give you this. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. If you're reading this, it means we finally found you. We never stopped searching, not a single day. Your mother left the porch light on every night for 30 years. It's still on. Dad. I pressed the note to my chest. The room blurred. For 32 years, I'd lived under a stolen name, worshiping a man who had built his empire on a kidnapping. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded foreign. What happens now? Agent Rivera's eyes were steady. Now, Miss Wynne, we start making this right. I nodded slowly, though every part of me felt fractured. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing footprints on the sidewalk. I realized I'd spent my whole life cleaning other people's messes, restoring paintings, repairing cracks. But this wasn't something I could fix with glue or varnish. This was a fracture carved into my existence, and it was time someone else cleaned it up. The hours after they left blurred into something unreal. I sat surrounded by papers that didn't belong to my life. The photo of the Monroes lay beside my coffee mug, the smiling couple holding their little girl, as if the world would never betray them. The handwriting on the letter trembled faintly where my tears had touched it. Outside, sirens echoed through the Chicago night, but inside there was only silence, the kind that hums behind your ribs when your whole identity collapses. I tried to process the impossible math of it all. 32 years. 32 years of calling a thief dad, of defending him to people who whispered he was cruel. I remembered his words. You're mine, the way he used to say it when I tried to move out, when I wanted to choose my own life. It had never been love. It had been ownership. I didn't sleep. When morning came gray and heavy, I opened my laptop and searched Layla Monroe missing. The screen filled with articles, grainy newspaper scans, updates from the foundation her parents had started. I saw the age progression sketches, the kind of hollow-eyed digital children they use for long-term abduction cases. My throat tightened. They looked like me. Every few years there had been new campaigns, billboards, local TV segments, anniversary interviews. Elaine Monroe, always the same quote. We just want to know she's alive. The ache in those words settled into my chest like a knife. I didn't even remember her face. Gregory and Veronica had replaced everything birthdays names the very shape of memory. They hadn't just kidnapped me. They'd erased me. Around noon, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me needed to hear a human voice. Miss Wynne. It was Margaret Hale. Her tone was steady but weighted. I know this is overwhelming, but the Bureau wants to brief you on the next steps. They'll need your statement and consent to approach the Wynnes formally. Formally, I repeated. You mean arrest them? Eventually, yes. But we have to build the case properly. You're not just a victim, you're the key witness. I laughed bitterly. The victim of a billionaire. Good luck. That's why it's important to stay calm, she said. And to stay safe. We don't know what he'll do once he realizes you know. The line clicked dead, and a cold certainty slid down my spine. Gregory would find out soon. He always found out. I went to the closet and pulled out a box of old things. Photos, letters, fragments of the person I thought I was. One Polaroid caught my attention. It was me, maybe 5 years old, sitting on Gregory's lap, holding a stuffed rabbit. His expression was unreadable. The back of the photo had handwriting I didn't recognize, Mexico City, 1999. My breath hitched. Mexico, the same place Margaret had said the false adoption papers came from. Proof had been sitting in my home for years. My entire childhood a crime scene no one noticed. When the knock came at the door that evening, my pulse spiked. I half expected reporters, or worse, him, but it was just the mailman leaving a small package wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Inside was a single item, the same silver bracelet I wore, only older, tarnished. A note attached read, I kept this for you. M. My real father. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped it. 2 bracelets identical. Proof of blood. Proof of truth. I placed them side by side on the table, the crescents facing each other like halves of a whole. For the first time since the slap, I cried without shame. Not for him, for me, for the life stolen, for the woman who left her porch light on, for a daughter who never came home. When the tears stopped, something else took their place, resolve. The realization that every cruel word Gregory had ever spoken, every you owe me, every you'd be nothing without me, had been projection. He wasn't my savior. He was my captor in a tailored suit. My phone buzzed again this time with a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a news headline, Gregory Wynne and family to appear live tonight for exclusive interview addressing recent rumors. Beneath it, a message, "You'll want to watch." I didn't recognize the number, but my instincts whispered it was someone on the inside, maybe one of the lawyers, maybe a friend of the Monroes. Either way, the timing felt orchestrated. I turned on the TV. The broadcast opened with the anchor smiling that neutral smile reserved for scandals of the rich. Then the camera cut to the Wynn mansion. Gregory sat beside Veronica and Lucas, all perfectly staged. "I'd like to clarify the lies circulating about our family," he said, voice dripping with practiced indignation. "We've been targeted by a malicious campaign. My daughter is unwell and we wish her nothing but healing." Lucas nodded solemnly. Veronica dabbed her eyes. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. They were rewriting the story in real time, turning my trauma into their performance. I grabbed my phone, opened the folder of evidence Margaret had sent me: police reports, the nanny's statement, DNA results. Proof. All of it. And I realized I didn't need to hide anymore. The power they'd held over me my entire life had been built on silence, and silence was over. I typed a message to Margaret. "I'm in. Let's bring them down." Her reply came seconds later. "Good. We start tomorrow." I looked back at the screen. Gregory was smiling now, toasting the camera with a glass of wine. The same motion he'd made before hitting me. The same hand that had stolen a child and built an empire from the theft. My voice was steady when I whispered to the empty room. "Enjoy your spotlight, Dad. It's the last one you'll ever have." Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Inside, the two silver bracelets glimmered under the light twin crescents, catching the reflection of a woman who was no longer anyone's possession. By the next morning, I was done crying. Grief had hardened into precision. For the first time in my life, I felt a kind of control Gregory could never imagine: cold, deliberate, unstoppable. The FBI had all the evidence they needed to build the case, but I wanted more than a quiet arrest. I wanted the truth dragged into the same spotlight he'd used to humiliate me. I called Margaret. "He's giving another live interview tomorrow," I said. "At the Wynn Media Center. The whole Empire's PR division will be there." She hesitated. "We're aware. Agent Rivera has a warrant ready, but it has to be executed carefully. Public arrest could complicate." "No," I interrupted. "It has to be public. He made my pain public. Let the world see his." There was a pause on the line, then Margaret's calm voice. "You understand the consequences completely." I spent that day in silence, studying the man who had raised me through the videos of his own lies. Every clip of him smiling, every speech about legacy now felt grotesque. That evening, the FBI briefed me in a quiet room at their Chicago field office. Rivera stood beside a map of the media center. "We'll move in during the live broadcast," he said. "You'll stay in a secured car nearby. Once we have them in custody, you'll be escorted out safely." "I'll stay until it's over," I said. "I want to see his face when the cameras turn." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you'll stay in the car, but you'll see it." The next day dawned crisp and brittle. Snow glittered like glass on the pavement. I wore black, the same color Veronica used to forbid me from wearing. "It washes you out," she'd said once. Now it made me feel invisible, untouchable. Margaret met me at the car outside the media center. They're inside, cameras rolling. When Rivera signals, we move. Through the tinted glass, I watched them gather on stage. Gregory in his tailored suit, Veronica in emerald green, Lucas beside them looking smug and untouchable. The logo of Wynn Holdings gleamed behind them, a monument to stolen lives. The host smiled at the audience. "Mr. Wynn, the world has been following your family's story closely. What do you want people to know?" Gregory leaned forward, hands folded, voice oozing false sincerity. "That the truth always prevails. My daughter has been misled by individuals seeking to harm our family, but we're stronger than lies." Veronica nodded, mascara flawless. "We love Clara," she said. "We just want her to get the help she needs." The crowd murmured approvingly. I felt bile rise in my throat. The audacity was surgical. They weren't just denying the crime, they were weaponizing compassion. I whispered to Margaret, "He's lying to millions, right now." "Not for long," she said, checking her watch. Rivera's voice came through her earpiece. "Positions confirmed. Moving in 30 seconds. My pulse thundered. Inside, Gregory was smiling, talking about family unity, his voice wrapping poison in velvet. Every family faces challenges, he said, but we endure, we forgive, we move forward. And then, sirens. The room inside erupted into confusion. Doors burst open. Agents in navy jackets flooded the set. The audience gasped, phones rising instantly. Rivera's voice boomed clear and commanding. Gregory Wynn, Veronica Wynn, Lucas Wynn, you are under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. For a heartbeat, Gregory didn't move. He looked around like a man waking from a dream. Cameras pivoted toward him, flashes exploding. The host stammered something about cutting the feed, but it was too late. The world was watching. Veronica's voice cracked high and sharp. This is ridiculous. We've done nothing wrong, agents closed in. Lucas tried to step between them, shouting, You can't do this on live TV. Rivera's answer was measured. That's exactly where this belongs. Gregory's face turned the color of ash. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he snarled. Rivera met his glare. A kidnapper, that's who. Watching from the car, I pressed a trembling hand against the window. Margaret looked at me but said nothing. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen as the man who had once towered over me was forced to his knees. Reporters shouted questions. One microphone caught Veronica's sobs. We just wanted a family. The words hit me like static. I whispered, You destroyed one to build yours. Rivera guided them out the back door, cameras following every step. Gregory lifted his head and for one fleeting second looked straight toward the car. Even through the glass, even from that distance, I saw it, the recognition, the ruin. His lips formed silent words. I'm sorry. I almost believed him, but then I remembered the bruise, the stolen name, the mother who never stopped waiting. I turned away. Margaret's phone buzzed Rivera, confirming the transport. It's done, she said softly. The reporters were already spinning the story, Billionaire Wynn family arrested in shocking live broadcast. Screens across the city replayed the footage in endless loops. The same people who had applauded him last week now watched his downfall like it was prime-time theater. As we drove away, I stared out at the skyline. Do you feel better? Margaret asked. I thought about it. No, I said quietly, but I feel free. That night, the footage spread everywhere, news channels, social media, gossip forums. For years, he'd shaped the narrative, made himself untouchable. Now the story had rewritten itself without his permission. The comments poured in. She warned them. He deserved it. Finally, justice. For the first time, my name wasn't a headline for disgrace. It was a headline for truth. Alone in my apartment, I replayed the moment on mute, the agents, the handcuffs, the flashbulbs. Each frame felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. The slap that started it all had echoed around the world. Now, so did the sound of justice catching up. The next morning, the city woke to snow and headlines that read like redemption. My phone vibrated with a message from Agent Rivera, court date confirmed. Thank you for your courage. I stared at the words for a long time, then set the phone down beside the 2 silver bracelets glimmering in the pale light. He used to say family was everything I whispered. He just never said which family he stole it from. The courthouse smelled of old paper and disinfectant. Cameras flashed outside as I walked up the steps flanked by Margaret and Agent Rivera. Snow melted into the marble, leaving gray puddles that reflected the chaos of reporters shouting my name. Inside, everything was quieter, colder, the kind of silence that follows a storm but promises another. The trial of Gregory and Veronica Wynn had drawn the entire nation. They were too rich, too powerful, too polished for anyone to believe they could commit a crime so primal. But the evidence was airtight: DNA tests, falsified documents, the nanny's confession, the forged adoption papers from Mexico. For once, truth didn't care about wealth. I took my seat in the front row as the defense paraded excuses. A misunderstanding, they said. An informal adoption gone wrong. The prosecutor, a woman named Judge Dillard, answered with steel. A kidnapping, not an adoption. Fraud, not family. When Gregory entered wearing a gray suit and that same hollow confidence, I felt my heart stutter. His hair was whiter now, his swagger replaced by calculation. Veronica followed trembling behind her veil of practiced sorrow. Lucas sat in the gallery, head bowed, the golden boy suddenly dull. The bailiff called my name. "Miss Clara Wynne, please take the stand." The courtroom tilted for a second. Margaret touched my arm gently. "You can do this." I walked to the witness box, the wood smooth and cold beneath my fingertips. The prosecutor smiled encouragingly. "Please state your name for the record." I took a breath. "Clara Wynne." I began and then stopped. The sound of that stolen name tasted like iron. I looked toward the judge. "Correction. My name is Layla Monroe." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Gregory's head jerked up. Veronica's painted lips parted. The prosecutor nodded slowly. "Miss Monroe, can you describe your relationship with the defendants?" "They raised me," I said. "They clothed me, fed me, and taught me that love had conditions. I believed they were my parents. I believed every punishment was deserved." My voice trembled, but I forced it steady. I didn't know they'd taken me from the people who actually loved me. The prosecutor guided me through the evidence, each question a scalpel cutting deeper into the lie. I spoke of the gala, the slap, the threats, the control. I told them about the falsified documents, the manipulation, the fear. When the prosecutor showed the photo of me as a child, the real me, Layla, in that yellow dress, I felt something loosen inside, like a chain breaking link by link. "What would you say to the man who raised you?" the prosecutor asked finally. I turned toward Gregory. He didn't look like a father anymore. He looked like an aging man clutching at power already gone. "I'd say, you taught me that obedience can feel like love if you're desperate enough," I said quietly. "You taught me how to survive cruelty with silence. But silence isn't love. It's captivity." He flinched, the first honest reaction I'd seen in years. The defense lawyer rose for cross-examination, his voice smooth as glass. "Miss Monroe, are you aware the defendants provided you with an education, a home, a life many children never have? Could it be that their intentions were at least in part compassionate?" I almost laughed. "Compassion doesn't begin with a kidnapping," I said, "and comfort built on a crime isn't generosity, it's ransom." The courtroom buzzed again. The lawyer's smile faltered. "So you deny that they loved you. They loved control." "That's not the same." I turned back to Gregory, my voice low but sharp enough to cut. "You didn't give me life. You stole it." His eyes filled with something between fury and regret. The judge banged the gavel once for order, but the damage was done. The trial stretched for days, testimonies, documents, recordings. Every detail of their empire was peeled back to reveal rot underneath shell companies' hush payments, private accounts used to bury their crimes. The media called it the Wynne dynasty collapse. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom held its breath. The judge's voice was even, almost merciful. "Gregory Wynne, for the crimes of kidnapping, fraud, and obstruction of justice, this court sentences you to 40 years in federal prison. Veronica Wynne, for conspiracy and falsification of documents, 35 years. Assets seized, properties forfeited. Custody to the Department of Justice." The sound that followed wasn't applause, it was exhale. The empire that had stood untouchable for decades fell in one sentence. Veronica broke first, sobbing into her hands, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. Gregory remained rigid until the bailiff approached. Then his mask cracked. "Layla," he rasped, voice raw. "I raised you." I met his eyes, steady. "You raised your own guilt." As they led him away in handcuffs, he glanced back once like he expected me to stop them, to forgive him, to be his daughter one last time. I didn't move. He disappeared through the side door, swallowed by the system he'd once manipulated. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed again. Questions flew through the air. "How does it feel? What happens now?" I said nothing. Margaret shielded me as we pushed through the chaos, Agent Rivera close behind. When we reached the car, Rivera said, "They'll spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Justice doesn't get cleaner than that." I stared out the window. The city lights shimmered on the wet streets. "Justice is never clean," I said softly. "It's just necessary." That night, the news replayed the footage over and over: Gregory's arrest, my testimony, the verdict. The headlines called me the billionaire's stolen daughter, but I didn't feel stolen anymore. I felt reclaimed. I went to the small wooden box on my table, opened it, and took out the 2 silver bracelets. I fastened both around my wrist, their cool weight grounding me. The sound of the clasp clicking shut was the quietest, sweetest kind of justice. 6 months passed before I stopped flinching at the sound of my own last name. The world still called me the stolen heiress, a phrase that turned tragedy into spectacle, but I wasn't interested in headlines anymore. I had something better: silence. I sold the apartment in Chicago, the one Gregory had bought under his company's name, and moved to Portland. It felt right to start again in the city where my life had first been taken. The Monroe's home sat on a hill overlooking the coast, weathered but warm, filled with traces of a love I had never known until now. My biological father Michael was there waiting when I arrived. He looked older than in the photo, but his smile was the same steady, patient, almost fragile. "You don't have to call me Dad," he said that first night. "Just Michael is fine." I did call him Dad eventually. It took time. The first few weeks were strange. The walls of his house held both grief and hope. The nursery kept untouched the photographs of a baby frozen in time. My mother, Elaine, had passed 5 years earlier, but she felt alive in every corner of that house. Her handwriting still covered recipe cards, her paintings lined the hall. Michael showed me the stack of letters she'd written every year on my birthday, each one ending with the same line: "We'll find you. Love doesn't lose its way forever." I read them all in one sitting, the ink blurring beneath tears I didn't bother to wipe away. I named my new studio Elaine's Light. It was small, just a converted warehouse downtown where the scent of sawdust and varnish hung in the air. I returned to restoration, but now it meant something different. Every painting I repaired, every frame I rebuilt, felt like stitching together parts of myself. The first piece I restored was a portrait of a mother and daughter, both wearing crescent bracelets. When it was done, I placed it by the window where the morning sun touched their faces first. Michael visited often. He'd bring coffee and stories about my mother, how she loved storms, how she sang off-key while cooking. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence watching the waves roll in from the coast. "You remind me of her," he said once. "Not just your eyes, the way you fix things." I smiled. Maybe that's her legacy, turning broken into beautiful. The media still tried to pull me back into the chaos. Offers poured in: book deals, interviews, even a movie script. I refused them all. I'd spent enough of my life being someone else's narrative. Now, I just wanted peace. Gregory and Veronica's trial had ended their empire for good. Wynn Holdings was dismantled, assets sold to compensate victims of their shell company frauds. Lucas took a plea deal for financial conspiracy, 5 years in prison. When I read that, I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Sometimes I wondered if Gregory thought about me in prison. The man who once demanded control now woke every morning under fluorescent lights following orders. I didn't hate him. Hate would have meant he still mattered. I'd let go of that weight the day I testified. Justice had done its job. Now I had to do mine live. One evening, as I closed the studio, I found a small velvet box on the doorstep. No note. Inside was the second silver bracelet, the one Michael had kept all those years. I think he said later when I asked, "It's time they're together again." I clasped it next to mine. The cool metal felt like closure. Weeks later, the FBI sent me a letter confirming the case's official closure. At the bottom, Rivera had written by hand, "You gave a lot of people hope, Layla. Don't underestimate what that means." I folded it into my journal next to my mother's letters. On the 1-year anniversary of the verdict, I held a small exhibition at my studio. The theme was restoration. Every piece had once been cracked, burned, or forgotten, brought back with care and patience. People wandered quietly through the space, touched by the stillness. I noticed one older woman crying softly in front of a painting of a child holding a silver bracelet. "My granddaughter went missing in '98, she whispered. "You give me hope." That night, when the gallery emptied, I stood alone before that same painting and whispered back, "So did someone else once." And she was right. The porch light at the Monroe house still burned every night. Michael said he'd never turn it off, not because we were waiting anymore, but because it had become a symbol. For everyone still searching, he said, Sometimes I drive out there after closing the studio. I sit on the steps with a mug of coffee, listening to the waves and watching that single light glow against the dark. It doesn't feel like loss anymore. It feels like guidance. I think about the girl I used to be, the one who thought love was something you earned through pain, who mistook control for care. I wish I could tell her that love doesn't demand silence, that family isn't defined by blood or money, but by who keeps the light on for you when the world goes dark. One night, as rain tapped gently against the window, I opened my mother's last letter again. If you ever find your way home, my darling girl, remember, your life didn't start with what was stolen. It starts with what you choose to rebuild. I closed the letter and looked around the studio, the candles flickering, the faint hum of the sea outside, the smell of wood and paint and salt. Everything here had been broken once, including me, and everything here had been made whole again. I whispered to the empty room, I'm not Clara Wynne anymore. I'm Layla Elaine Monroe. And I'm home. Outside, the light burned steady, a small sun in the night. And for the first time, I believed it wasn't just for me. It was for everyone still trying to find their way back to themselves. A year after the verdict, I found myself back in Chicago, not for vengeance or closure, but to face the echoes of what used to own me. The city looked smaller now, as if the towers had shrunk since I'd stopped seeing them through Gregory's shadow. Snow brushed the skyline, and the wind off the river carried the same metallic chill as the night he slapped me. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had come to attend an auction, the liquidation of Wynne Holdings' final assets. Margaret had called to say the estate was nearly settled, and asked if I wanted to reclaim anything that had once been mine. I told her I wanted only one piece, the mahogany desk from his office, the same desk he'd used to sign deals, issue orders, and lock away secrets. It was heavy, scarred, and haunted by a kind of arrogance that used to intimidate me. Now it just looked tired. When the auctioneer brought it up, I raised my hand quietly. No one bid against me. I bought it for a fraction of what it had once represented. That night, they delivered it to my Portland studio. I sanded it myself, smoothing away the scratches, replacing the brass handles. Underneath one drawer, I found a hidden compartment, a false panel concealing a single yellowed photograph. It was me at 4 years old, asleep in Gregory's arms. He looked almost human in that moment, unaware of the camera. On the back, in Veronica's looping handwriting, were 3 words, "Our perfect secret." I burned the photo in the sink and watched the ashes curl into nothing. A few months later, I opened a nonprofit branch attached to Elaine's Light. We called it the Porch Project, named for the light my mother had left on. Its mission was simple funding searches for long-term missing children and offering restoration therapy for families living in the gray zone between hope and grief. The first time we reunited a mother with her missing teenage son, I stood in the corner, hands trembling. She clung to him like the world had restarted. When she whispered, I never stopped believing I had to leave the room and cry in the hallway. Some wounds heal by healing others. Michael helped run the project's logistics. He said it gave him purpose again. We spoke often of Elaine, how proud she would have been, how stubbornly she would have refused to rest until every missing child had a chance to be found. Sometimes at night, he'd sit by the window staring at the sea, the silver bracelet glinting on his wrist. You know, he told me once, for 30 years, I imagined what I'd say if we ever found you. I rehearsed it 1,000 times. But when I saw you that day, I couldn't say anything. I smiled softly. You didn't have to. You just showed up. The media eventually moved on. The Wynne scandal became a cautionary tale, a Netflix documentary, a lecture topic for law students about greed and power. I never participated. I didn't want my story reduced to entertainment again. Instead, I focused on the quiet things, restoring art, writing small notes in the margins of my mother's letters, learning to cook the recipes she'd left behind. Sometimes I dreamed of Gregory not as the man who hit me, but as the man he might have been if he hadn't built his life on lies. In those dreams, he sat across from me at the old mahogany desk, looking tired, remorseful, silent. And each time I forgave him a little more, not for his sake, but for mine. 6 months after the Porch Project opened, we received a letter from the state correctional facility. Gregory had suffered a stroke. He wasn't expected to recover. The warden said he'd requested to see me. For 2 days, I debated. Michael told me, you don't owe him anything. But something inside me needed to look him in the eye one last time. not as his possession, but as the woman he failed to break. The prison smelled like bleach and metal. When I walked into the infirmary, he was barely conscious, tubes snaking around his arms. His eyes flickered open when he heard my name. "Clara," he rasped. I shook my head. "Not anymore." His lips trembled. "I wanted to give you everything." I met his gaze. "You gave me nothing that wasn't stolen." His hand lifted weakly, reaching for mine. I hesitated, then let him hold it, not out of love, but closure. His voice cracked. "I thought, if you needed me, you'd stay." "You were wrong," I said quietly. "The only thing I needed was to leave." He smiled faintly, a broken thing. "You sound like her." I wasn't sure if he meant my mother or the part of himself he lost to his own lies. I didn't ask. When he closed his eyes for the last time, I whispered, "You're forgiven." "But you're not absolved." 2 weeks later, he was gone. There was no public funeral, just a closed statement from the court and a line in the paper. I didn't attend. Instead, I lit a candle in my studio and opened my mother's last letter again. The words glowed under the flicker of flame. "Love isn't about who keeps you, it's about who frees you." That night, I placed the candle on the mahogany desk. The same desk that had once symbolized his power now carried mine. Around it were pieces of art restored by my hands, paintings of families, reunited children, smiling light returning. I realized something then. Forgiveness isn't surrender. It's reclamation. When dawn came, I stepped outside. The coast was quiet silver waves curling against the rocks. I held my bracelet to the light, the twin crescents gleaming. "We did it, Mom," I whispered. "We came home." The sea answered in its own language, a steady, endless rhythm that sounded like peace. And that's how my story ends. Not in revenge, not in rage, but in restoration. The girl once erased became the woman who rewrote her name, not in court filings or headlines, but in the quiet hum of a workshop by the sea where broken things found new life, and so did I.